Going through some of the draft grades that the Buccaneers have received and giving out some of my own, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to Amazon.com/FireTV Locked On to learn more. It's one of our favorite times of the year. The dust has settled around the NFL draft. The cleanup is all done there in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And now fans look wherever they can to find confirmation or validation that their team did a good job bringing in players that will help win a championship. And where do they look for that? Draft grades. Now, full disclosure, and I have mentioned this on the show before for you everydayers, but I am a big proponent of the fact that you cannot truly or accurately grade a draft until about 3 years later based on the impact that they had or how they've translated to the NFL. That said, you can grade them here based on performance of the players that, were drafted, on how they produced in college and what kind of needs the teams addressed, things like that. But you're not going to get a true idea of how good or bad a draft class is until a few years down the road. But draft grades are basically the collective value of the players selected based on the personal draft board of the person doing the grading. And then there's Mel Kiper stupidity. We're going to get to that in a little bit. But let's start things off with NFL.com's draft grades, which come from their draft analyst, Chad Reuter, who I have referenced plenty on the show throughout the draft process. Now, Chad is a pretty easy grader. His lowest grade of any team was a B-. He gave that out to multiple teams, but that's the lowest he goes. But he gives the Bucs a B+ overall, broken down day by day. He gave them a B+ on day 1, a B on day 2, a B+ on day 3. And Chad said, quote, "I pegged Ibuka as a top 20 talent, so I wasn't surprised by where he was taken, despite the Buccaneers' more evident roster needs. They addressed one of those areas, the secondary, with a pair of day 2 picks, which could pay off if Morrison rebounds from hip injury and the 5'10", 191-pound Parrish outplays his size. Walker is a thickly built edge, and Roberts is a large and athletic 5 technique, bolstering Tampa Bay's front 7. Johnson's very slight frame and slow 40 time belie his talent as a receiver, able to work the middle and get deep," end quote. For the record, this was the highest grade that he gave to NFC South teams. He gave Atlanta, Carolina, and New Orleans all B-. But the obvious knock here from Reuter is that the Bucs draft selection of a player was not a glaring position of need in the first round, and then the injury and size concerns surrounding the day 2 picks. Next up are Nate Tice and Charles McDonald of Yahoo Sports. They gave the Bucs a B, and they said, quote, "The Emeka Ibuka pick is interesting in terms of his fit with Chris Godwin for the immediate future. There's a lot to like about what the Buccaneers did. Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish are a fun playmaking cornerback duo to add to the Bucs secondary, and David Walker has a chance to be a gem as a pass rusher. It's a really nice collection of players, even if Ibuka will be an interesting case to track," end quote. They also named Ibuka the Bucs' most interesting pick. And then among the NFC South, they gave the Panthers an A, the Saints a B-, and the Falcons a C-. The Falcons also got their lowest grade out of the entire NFL for their draft from Yahoo Sports. PFF gave the Bucs a B+, calling the first-round pick of Ibuka a long-term approach to pass catcher while calling him an instant contributor. As for Benjamin Morrison, they said that he should provide an instant boost to the secondary. Parrish, they cite that he produced the third highest advanced coverage grade in this draft class, behind only Travis Hunter and Jahdae Barron. PFF gave the Saints a C+, the Panthers an A+, and Atlanta an A-. The last one I'm going to touch on here to open up the show is CBS Sports and their collection of Pete Prisco, Chris Trapasso, and Josh Edwards. They gave out grades for each individual selection throughout the draft. And for Ibuka, Prisco gave the Bucs a B-, saying, quote, with Mike Evans getting up there in years and Chris Godwin coming off injury, Ibuka is a solid pick. I love him as a player, and Jason Licht does a great job, but why not defense? Maybe the value was too much to pass up, end quote. And real quick here, let me touch on this. Yes, we all expected defense. Many expected an edge rusher, maybe Jahad Campbell as an off-ball linebacker. You all know I was a big proponent of his. You had Jahdae Barron, who went the pick after the Bucs. But here's the thing that became more evident than ever, and we're all going to have to remember for next year when talking about potential targets. The Buccaneers draft a certain kind of person, not just a certain kind of player. Look at the players they drafted: high character, leaders, captains, family-oriented, just all around great human beings. They have a silhouette of Levante David painted in their building, describing what it means to be a Buccaneer man. They are not going to draft anyone with any kind of character concerns at all. Mike Green, James Pierce, who I took in the Locked On mock draft, those guys were never going to be in consideration for the Bucs. As for Jahad Campbell, there were injury concerns that he's not only returning from shoulder surgery, but that he's also going to have surgery on the other shoulder after his rookie season. The Bucs already have a linebacker that had to have surgery coming into the league, and now he is coming back from that in Servassier Dennis. So honestly, it probably really boiled down to Ibuka or Barron. And as I mentioned on the live show, the drop-off in talent from Ibuka to the second and third round receivers versus the drop-off from Barron to the second and third round corners was a much bigger drop. So they took the talent of the guy that they weren't going to be able to get close to on the next day. Also bear in mind that Barron isn't a typical Todd Bowles corner in terms of size, at least when you're talking about the outside. I know we're about to talk about a smaller corner that they did draft from Kansas State, but he's a slot corner. The Bucs needed the outside corner, which is why they took Benjamin Morrison and probably passed on Jahdae Barron for Emeka Ibuka. But speaking of that next day, Trapasso graded the second round and gave the Bucs an A for the selection of Benjamin Morrison, saying, quote, if Morrison is healthy, this is a first-round talent, arguably the best pure route mirroring cornerback in this class. Ultra smooth with natural instincts. Ball skills are fantastic. Quality speed. Tackling can improve. Big need for Tampa Bay to pair with Zion McCollum, end quote. Yes, Morrison's talent is much closer to Jahdae Barron than any of the receivers at that point were to Ibuka, which is the point that I was basically making. Next, the third round, also graded by Trapasso, and the selection of Jacob Parrish, he gave the Bucs a B+, saying, quote, classic Kansas State cornerback, in your face, uber aggressive, plays bigger than his size, decently twitchy, and has the game and arm length to play on the perimeter if needed. Uses subtle contact to stay connected in man despite not being the most electric athlete. I like this selection, end quote. Round 4 in David Walker, Trapasso gives the Bucs an A-, saying ridiculous film and production at the FBS level, squatty with short arms, but plays with serious bend and has a fantastic repertoire of pass rush moves, will get overwhelmed at times, but his low center of gravity allows him to play with surprising power. Smart pick to add depth to the defensive end position, which was clear need on this team, end quote. Elijah Roberts, Trapasso gave the Bucs a B, saying, quote, More defensive line help in Tampa Bay. Roberts is a huge and athletic three-down type with a diverse collection of maneuvers to beat blockers at the point of attack. Thick frame with outstanding length. His burst leaves a little to be desired, and he's an older prospect. Strong edge-setting play will enter the Tampa organization with high floor, but not much upside, end quote. Finally, the selection of Tez Johnson in the 7th round. Josh Edwards gave the Bucs a B+, saying, quote, Johnson did not run fast during the pre-draft process, but the play speed was much faster. Johnson has a very thin frame, but will not be required to see significant action early. Good flyer late on day 3, end quote. Ultimately, Prisco gave the Bucs an overall grade of an A, naming Parrish as the team's best pick, the worst pick being Ibuka, based solely off of him saying that if it were him, he would have gone, edge or corner, and not a reflection of Ibuka as a player who he repeatedly said that he likes. But then he wrapped things up saying, quote, it's time Bucs general manager Jason Licht gets the due for being a good drafter. He continues to nail his picks. This draft was no different. Ibuka going in the first was a little odd, even if he is a good player, but Light made up for it with the rest of the draft. He got 2 corners in Benjamin Morrison and Parrish, which they needed. I like the 7th round receiver, Tez Johnson. He plays faster than he ran at the combine. Prisco also gave the Saints a C, the Panthers a B-, and the Falcons a B-. So the Bucs were the highest graded team by Pete Prisco in the NFC South. But what about the all-knowing, super-wise draft evaluation deity known as Mel Kiper? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, even plan all of your long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. The NFL draft is over, but roster moves and news never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, Mel Kiper certainly made himself the center of attention over the weekend with his draft takes, and he released his draft grades, in which he gave the Bucs a B, saying, quote, Ibuka is the headliner in a decent draft class for the 4-time defending NFC South champs. While I wasn't focused on wide receiver with my team needs, I had edge rusher and cornerback circled. Tampa Bay used its top picks at the edge in 2021 and 2022, but things haven't panned out. The Buccaneers spent Friday night tending to their cornerback depth chart, landing Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish. Morrison fell on boards after a hip injury ended his 2024 season, but he's great in press coverage and has good ball skills. Parrish was a combine riser for me, and his explosive traits will shine in the slot, end quote. As for the rest of the NFC South, he gave the Saints a B-, the Falcons a C, and the Panthers a C+. Kiper handed out just one A+ for the draft, and it was, of course, for the Cleveland Browns, because they drafted Shedeur Sanders. All right. I'm going to say my piece about this, and then hopefully I never have to talk about it again. Mel Kiper spent the weekend showing the full extent of his unprofessionalism, putting it on display for the world to see. This was a 65-year-old man throwing a full-blown temper tantrum because Shedeur Sanders didn't go in the first round. Then he kept falling and falling and falling. And look, we all had our favorite players in the draft, but his behavior was despicable, inexcusable, and flat out disgusting. This man went on a tirade about how the NFL has had a problem evaluating quarterbacks and they don't know how to do it. He literally called the NFL clueless. All right, Chief, you want to go down that road? Let's go ahead and get this thing started. You promised that you would quit your job as a draft analyst if Jimmy Clausen didn't become a franchise quarterback. You hyped up Johnny Manziel. You said Trent Dilfer was a surefire Hall of Famer. You said the Lions wasted their pick on Calvin Johnson while calling their selection of receiver Mike Williams a slam dunk and said that he should be presented with a gold jacket on the draft stage. You bashed the selection of Julio Jones by the Falcons, saying that he wasn't sure-handed enough to trade up for. You said David Carr was the next Troy Aikman, Jamarcus Russell was the next John Elway, and thought Andre Wadsworth was a better NFL prospect than Peyton Manning. You also claimed that Kajana Carter was better than Bo Jackson, graded the 5th-round pick of Richard Sherman a D+, and said that Ricky Stanzi was going to be Tom Brady. So when he's pulling his hair out on national television, screaming at co-panelists Louis Riddick and Reese Davis that the NFL has been clueless for 50 years in evaluating quarterbacks, he comes across as a gigantic baby that was basically on the stage as Shador's personal hype man rather than a true analyst. Shador's fall had some to do with talent, some to do with attitude and personality, and some to do with media manufactured hype spearheaded by guys like Mel Kiper. None of these teams wanted a circus coming to town to create drama and distractions because all anyone wants to talk about or record for their shows was the backup quarterback. Shador flat out is not a starting quarterback in this league, and teams didn't want to deal with the sideshow that came with it. They didn't want to deal with the media asking every day when Shador was going to start if the team was struggling out of the gates. They didn't want to deal with Good Morning Football or First Take starting off every show every day asking why Shador isn't the starter. They didn't want to deal with the guy walking in the door that was going to act as if he should be handed the starting job because he's always been handed the starting job because he's never played for anyone except for his dad. But for Kiper to make it a 3-day show about how enraged he is that no one took him, then sit there and have the audacity and the gall to say that it's the NFL that has a problem evaluating quarterbacks when he's been consistently wrong more than anyone in history, including meteorologists and Taylor Swift's Choice of Men. That was an all-time low and disgusting display that should result in him never setting foot on a television set again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I only watch NFL Network's draft coverage. Only one draft coverage has Rich Eisen, the GOAT, and the other one offers you Mel Kiper, the world's worst football analyst. So now it's time for me to give my grades because we all know that I'm going to do a better job of it than Mel Kiper ever has. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. NBA playoffs are here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place a $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Right now, the Oklahoma City Thunder are the favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 150, followed by the defending champion Boston Celtics at plus 200, the Cleveland Cavaliers at plus 490, and the Golden State Warriors have taken over fourth place at plus 1,800. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think Boston is the most talented and deepest team in the playoffs. My money is on them to go back to back. But don't you miss out. If you think I'm wrong, place that first $5 bet for a chance to claim your $250 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com today. Represent flipping things up here on a draft grade edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and it's time to hand out my draft grades. And I'm going to do this the same way that CBS did. I'm going to give out grades for each individual pick and then an overall grade at the end. So let's start with that first pick and Ohio State receiver Emeka Egbuka, and I give this one a B+. He's an insanely talented receiver, and I cannot wait to see him in this offense, but I'm worried that he's not going to get a ton of opportunities early on. Now, if he comes on late, the way that Jalen McMillan did last year, that might just be the boost that they need to become an extremely difficult playoff matchup. I think long-term, Egbuka is going to be every bit as popular as Chris Godwin is amongst Bucs fans. He's going to be wildly productive and successful in the NFL. I just want to temper expectations for early on in the 2025 season. Benjamin Morrison in round 2, that's an A. You got a first-round talent at pick 53. He looks fantastic coming off the hip surgery at his individual workout. If he plays the way that he did at Notre Dame, he is going to be a star, not just in Tampa, but in the NFL. Jacob Parrish, I'm going to give a B+. I am a little bit worried about the size, but you cannot argue the production or the toughness. Sometimes those smaller, scrappy guys on defense tend to really produce because they're underestimated and they feel like they have more to prove at the next level. So they work a little bit harder. They learn a little bit quicker. They try to make themselves indisposable as quickly as possible. Parrish is going to get a chance to win the starting slot job in training camp, and that's going to make the depth in the secondary that much better if he does win. If he honestly beats out Christian Izien and then allows Izien to be a depth piece both at corner and at safety, that's going to help the Bucs depth in the secondary, kind of that 2-for-1 scenario that we see so much with the offensive line where the Bucs can keep one or two fewer because they have so many guys that can play multiple positions. The same is true with Christian Izien. David Walker, I give that one an A+. Overlooked because of the small school that he went to, questions surrounding whether or not he can translate to the competition at the NFL level. I don't think there's much question that he has the size and the speed that you want. He has shown that he can take over games. Even when the competition increased at the Senior Bowl, he was still dominant. Again, going back to the fact, much like Egbuka, he's not going to have to be the guy right out of the gate. He's going to be part of a rotation. He can come along at his own speed. And then later into the season, if he starts to become a bigger part of the rotation, starts to become a little bit more productive, that's one more thing that teams in the postseason are going to have to seriously worry about if they're matched up against Tampa. I absolutely love the addition of David Walker. Elijah Roberts, I give that one an A-. They were looking for depth here, and if he does indeed replace William Golston, which I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I don't think the Bucs go out and bring back William Golston at this stage. And if he goes out and he plays that same role that Golston did, he is going to fit perfectly along that defensive line and among that rotation. You don't need him to be a 7 or 8 sack guy. Maybe he gets, 1.5, 2, lucky to get 3 sacks out of him, but be productive in shutting down the run and eating up blocks to clear ways for some of those other guys. He really helps bolster this Bucs defensive line if he can, produce the way in the NFL that he did in college. Big guy, needs a little bit of help with the burst, but along that defensive line, even if it's, with Vita and Kalijah on the sideline, you still have Logan Hall out there. You would still have Greg Gaines out there. He would still be able to add something to the initial rush of the down lineman. And then finally, Tez Johnson. I'm going to give this one a B+. I love bringing in competition for Trey Palmer in the return game, while he can also contribute on the offense in other ways. He's a role player. He's a specialist, but he's going to have the chance to be an impact player on both special teams and in the offense. And when you're picking guys in the 7th round, you're looking, will they contribute on special teams at the very least as a rookie? Can we get something out of them? And Tez Johnson does exactly that. May only see the field as a receiver a handful of times and, be out there in situational plays. But as a special teamer, he can flip the field and really benefit the Bucs offense in that way. All in all, I give the Bucs an A- for this draft. There isn't a player that they took that I can't see why they took him, or I don't see the value in what they bring to the roster. Were there other guys that I liked better at some of these other positions? Well, of course there were. But that doesn't mean that I think the Bucs made mistakes. After the draft was over, you can look back at the Ibuka pick as one that really makes sense with all the other talent that fell to them and they were able to bring in. You can consider the fact that Morrison was a consensus top 20 pick before that injury. So the Bucs got arguably 2 first-rounders if Morrison is who I think and who obviously the Bucs think he is going to be at the next level. We're not going to know for sure until these guys have played for a few years, but this looks like another really solid draft class from Jason Licht. And I know I haven't gone through all of the undrafted free agents yet. They've brought in a couple of receivers. They brought in a quarterback. They brought in that absolute behemoth from Florida. His name escapes me, but he's like 6'6", 464 pounds. Yeah. Good luck with the tush push, Philadelphia, when you got that guy lined up next to Vita Vea. But they're still bringing in more talent for rookie minicamp, tryouts at training camp. And Jason Licht has done a good job in the past at finding these gems in undrafted free agency. Cam Brate was an undrafted free agent. Rakim Jarrett, that the Bucs are really high on, he was an undrafted free agent. They've been able to find these guys. Jose Ramirez and Marquise Watts, those are more guys that, were brought in that the Bucs are really high on. So just because they're undrafted free agents doesn't mean that they cannot work their way onto the 53-man roster. I'm stoked for rookie minicamp to get underway and start to see some of these guys on the field. Right after that, you have OTAs, and then you have training camp starting at the end of July. So we're going to start to see how this Bucs defense is taking shape. Look at some of those position battles between Jacob Parrish and Christian Izien, between Benjamin Morrison and Jamel Dean, between David Walker and Chris Braswell, for who's going to be that next guy in on the edge rotation to go alongside Anthony Nelson. So there's some really intriguing storylines. We're going to start to get an idea as to how often the Bucs are going to start to run these 4 receiver sets, spread out the defense, clear lanes for Bucky, as well as getting mismatches in these one-on-one opportunities with 4 absolutely electric receivers. I'm going to say it all off season long. I'm going to say it all season long. There is not a team in the NFL that has a better wide receiver core than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after they added Emeka Ibuka. Absolutely unreal what this offense is going to be capable of. That's going to do it for this episode. Coming up tomorrow, Evan Klosky is, of course, coming by to give his thoughts on the Bucs draft. Spoiler alert, he loved the first-round pick because he got a Buckeye. So we all know that that's coming. He might love the Ibuka pick more than I love the Morrison pick, but we're going to find out from him on tomorrow's show. Until then, please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.